Hi, I'm Kelly. I'm on Instagram as Algebra Wonderland, and that's also my Teachers Pay Teachers store name. I have over a decade of experience as a math teacher in New York State in grades 7 through 12, but I've spent most of my time in my career in the Algebra 1 course. I've worked with all different populations from general ed to special education, English language learners, students from low income backgrounds, and I have learned a lot. I certainly don't know it all, but what I want to do today is share some of the ways that I've shifted my instructional strategies to make review activities more student-centered. When I first started teaching, my review days all looked the same. Here's your worksheet. If you don't finish it in class, finish it for homework. And I would have some students fly through it. Others needed help on every single question, and some just opted out and chose not to do it at all. Across the board, it did not feel like time well spent for anybody. Over the last decade, I've noticed some pitfalls of traditional review and found micro shifts I can make to the activities I implement so that students are at the center of the work and I'm the facilitator to their learning. These small shifts have a big impact, and I believe they can do the same for you and your students. So let's take a look at some goals. In this workshop, I want to show you the problems, identifying some of the pitfalls, and the solutions, identifying those micro shifts that we can make to our instructional activities so that they are more student-centered. So let's begin. If you haven't read the book Building Thinking Classrooms by Peter Liljedahl, I'm going to start by just putting a plug out there. That is well worth your time. It's taught me so much, but one of the things that it's taught me is that I answer way too many questions for my students. Specifically, I answer too many of what he calls stop thinking questions. They're literally questions that allow the student to stop having to do the work instead of encouraging them to further their thinking and their learning. Traditional review has teachers as the sage on the stage, and they are presenting the answers and identifying the mistakes. A micro shift that we can make is implementing activities that require students to be the ones in the driver's seat analyzing their work. And bonus, if you have the students working collaboratively. We can do this by implementing error analysis tasks and peer assessment and setting the norm that at this point, the teacher has shared the knowledge with students and now they need to work together to fine-tune their skills. I think it goes a long way with students by being explicit about this too. I tell my students that I'm not going to tell them where their mistake is. I encourage them to ask peers, and especially more than one. So like I said, when I used traditional review earlier in my career, I had some students flying through the activity while others needed their hand held. And I just felt like the task wasn't challenging anyone as best as it could. And I felt like I was doing way too much of the work. So pitfall number 2 of traditional review is that students aren't given the opportunity to be the leader and to teach one another. Instead, we need to implement activities where students work collaboratively and have equal opportunities to play these roles. I like using self-checking activities so students don't need my validation to move forward with their work. And I implement activities like task cards with the norm that students rotate the role of who picks up the task card to read the question and lead the solution process. It's important to have that rotation of roles so there's equity in participation. I know there's some crazy statistic out there about how much we as the teachers are the ones talking in class, but I don't know what it is. However, I can tell you that it supports the fact that we definitely talk way too much. And a pitfall of traditional review and instruction in general is that students need to learn to discuss their work. We can make the shift to implement activities where students are required to engage in that discussion. I love using number talks and peer conferencing to start with this. Once you practice it in these ways, it's easier to start building up group or whole discussions. It's important to get students talking about their work because that develops a deeper understanding of the content and it can reveal misconceptions. And I also know it's a great way to prepare students for the rigor of state assessments and course finals. Going back to when I read Building Thinking Classrooms by Peter Liljedahl, I realized that I don't give my students enough time to productively struggle. Just as I said earlier, we often jump in right away to show students where their mistake is, and we also do the same with the problem-solving process. So to minimize this, we can make a micro shift of implementing activities that allow students to answer basic questions like, is my answer correct? And we can really be explicit about the types of questions that students should be asking the teacher. Students' own resources and peers can be the source of so many answers. And I found it goes a long way when I explicitly tell my students that I expect them to use these resources before they come and see me. And I'll often send my students back to those resources when they do come up to me and ask a question that I know they can answer without me. Activities like self-checking task cards and partner practices, where the task is designed to have partners have different questions that result in the same answer, are really great for this because they can check their work together, they know if it's correct, and they're able to troubleshoot if it's not. And it requires them to have those conversations and for them all to participate. Lastly, for this workshop at least, pitfall number 5 is that when students are preparing for assessments, they aren't given the opportunity to think critically about how their test questions are formed. They're given the review sheet and they complete it. A micro shift that we can make is implementing activities where students develop higher order thinking questions on their own or with peers. They can do this by making practice tests or questions for a review game. It's a valuable experience for students to think about how the questions are formed, and it can be really engaging too. Now, I want to save you some time. These pitfalls are all addressed in a guide that I created based off of the goals of today's workshop. The Route to Reigniting Review has a workbook and quick video resources to teach you 5 simple activities for implementing student-centered review. And I'm a big believer in working smarter and not harder, so most of these can be done with absolutely no prep time. And for anything that needs prep, I've added in time-saving templates because your time and energy is precious. This guide is valued at over $100, but I'm selling it to you for just $35. And as a thank you for attending this workshop, I want to offer you a special discount code that you can use at checkout to get an extra 10% off. That code is workshop10. I've seen how these strategies have positively impacted the learning in my classroom and also classroom community and climate, and I want the same for you. I wish you all the best and thank you for checking out this workshop. Stay connected with me on Instagram at Algebra Wonderland and let me know what I can do to help you next. Until next time, have a wonderful time teaching.